Tonight we're going to read chapters 16 through 18 of The Wishmakers. Vale was right. There were no beds in the forest. We had to pick our way carefully down a crevasse and in the back of Mount Rushmore before making our way several miles into the dark forest of the Black Hills. I'm guessing it was way past midnight when we finally decided to stop for sleep. It was a good idea to put some distance between us and the National Monument. I didn't know how the universe's shield would explain the strange magical happenings at the park, but none of us wanted to stick around and find out. Ridge and I found a comfortable spot below a pine tree where we could lie down without too many little rocks jabbing us in the back. Tina and Vale bedded down several yards away. They were close enough that I could shout for help, but not too close in case Tina snored. Have you ever slept outside in the forest without a tent or a blanket? I didn't even have my backpack to use as a pillow anymore. I just couldn't get comfortable. And after several minutes of tossing and turning, I decided that my inability to sleep was also due to something I couldn't get out of my mind. "Rich," I whispered, reaching over and poking him in the shoulder. "You awake?" "I am now," he said. "We could have died today," I said. "Tell me about it," he answered. "You're not the one who got pushed off a cliff." "I know, but we're tethered together. So I would have gone over with you," I said. "Can genies die?" "Oh, yeah," he said, sitting up under the pine tree, "just like you, or Tina." He scratched a hand through his curly black hair. "And it hurts to die?" I asked. "Maybe," he answered. "I've never done it before. This is kind of morbid, Ace. Are you all right?" "Tomorrow probably isn't going to be any less dangerous," I said. "And there's something I have to know in case I don't make it through the week." I sat up next to Ridge, reaching into my pocket for the only item that had ever truly been mine. It was a bit awkward to reach into a backward pocket, but in a moment I had retrieved my folded card. "What's that?" he asked, seeing me flick the edge of the card with my thumb, a nervous habit that had led to a worn and frayed spot. "I don't remember anything about my family," I said. "The Lindens?" "Not my foster parents," I said. "My real family. My memories began 3 years ago, when I was 9 years old. I woke up in a hospital. The doctor said I just stumbled in. Nobody knew where I came from or what happened to me. Nobody knew who I was. Nobody knew my name, but," Ridge stammered, "you're Ace." I unfolded the small card and handed it to him. The moonlight glimmered on the glossy coating, and Ridge held it close to his face for inspection. "The Ace of Hearts," I said. "From a deck of playing cards." Ridge turned it over to look at the back, but I knew from countless hours of studying it that he wouldn't find anything. It was the only thing I had with me when I came into the hospital. "Ace," Ridge muttered. "So," I began, taking a deep breath, "I guess I want the universe to tell me." I started the sentence over, making it official. "I wish I knew my past." At the sound of those magical words, my hourglass watch clicked open, and Ridge took a deep breath. "I had no idea," he said, still staring at the card I had handed him. "I'm sorry." "Time's ticking," I replied, holding up my wrist so he could see the white sand spilling. It took me 2 days to build up the courage to make this wish. Just tell me the consequence. You won't like it, Ridge said. It seems the universe holds that knowledge at a very high price. What is it? My hands were sweating despite the coolness of the night. My throat felt tight. If you want to know about your past, said Ridge, then every person who has ever seen you will cease to exist. I felt my hopes leak out like air from a punctured balloon. I thought of all the people who had seen me in the last 3 years since my memories began. People at school, people around town, thousands, if not more. What will happen to them? I asked. It'll be like they were never born, Ridge said. Anyone who ever laid eyes on you will simply vanish. All traces of their lives will be erased. It won't change the past. What those people did will still have been done. But from this moment on, the world would go on without them, as though they never lived. Tina, Vale, and Ridge had all seen me. If I accepted the consequence, I'd suddenly find myself alone in the forest of South Dakota, but Thackeray Anderson would also cease to exist. In a way, I would have completed my quest, but it wouldn't stop there. The Lindens and my previous foster parents would disappear. The unraveling would continue until there was no one left who knew me. But I'd know my past. I'd know who my family was and where I came from. I couldn't believe I was actually considering it. If the wish were anything else, I would have turned down the consequence the moment Ridge explained it. But this was the only thing I'd ever truly wanted in life. What was I willing to pay to know my past? Your time's almost up, Ridge said softly. Obviously, he didn't want me to take the consequence. Doing so would abruptly end his life. My 30 seconds ran out, and I didn't answer. The little hourglass collapsed back into a shiny disc on my wrist, and I slumped to the ground. I don't get it, I muttered. Wishing to know my past doesn't have anything to do with stopping Thackeray Anderson. But that was the worst consequence yet. Ridge shrugged. Maybe it is connected somehow. We just don't see it. What do you mean? I don't know, he answered. Maybe Thackeray is your brother, and that mean guy who talks like a pirate is your dad. I shuddered. That's a horrible thought. But knowing it would change the way you see the quest, answered Ridge. If learning your past armed you with important quest-related knowledge, then it would make sense why the universe would hold it at such a high price. I guess. It was frustrating. If a genie couldn't even help me, then how was I supposed to learn the truth? Wouldn't they have recognized me? Not if there was a wish in play, Ridge said. Or maybe they just pretended not to know me, I muttered. Maybe they got rid of me and don't want me back. That was a depressing thought. In all the years I had imagined my family, I had never considered that they might not have wanted me. Hey, if those guys don't want you to be a part of their family, it's probably because you're too nice, Ridge replied with a chuckle. But it didn't make me feel better. He fell quiet, then cleared his throat. This is my first quest, Ridge said. I turned my head to look at him, puzzled by the sudden admittance. What? You're my first wish maker, Ridge explained. I'd never been out of the jar until you opened it. He sighed, as though glad to have the truth off his shoulders. I don't really know what I'm doing. I grinned. I've noticed. I should have told you the truth before, he muttered. But I didn't want you to think I was a bad genie. I nodded my head sympathetically. So, why did you decide to tell me now? Ridge shrugged. That wish you just made? I know it was hard for you to talk about your past. He reached out and handed me back my card. It seemed only fair for me to tell you something that's hard for me to talk about. I took the card from his hand, folding it along its familiar creases and tucking it into my backward pocket once more. I didn't want you to be disappointed, said Ridge. I knew you were counting on me to get us through. But I don't actually have any past experience. The only stuff I know is what the universe told me before the jar opened. But what about your name? I asked. I thought genies were named after the place where their jar was first discovered. Yeah, he said. Ridge Lane. That's the address of your foster home. I saw it on an envelope when I first appeared. Ridge Lane. The address didn't sound familiar, but that was because a consequence had forced me to forget it. I thought you were named after a mountain ridge or something, not something boring like a street in the suburbs. That seemed a little like cheating. Well, it could have been worse, Ridge said. Technically, I should have named myself Kitchen. We both laughed at that, and I settled my head back, looking up at the starry sky through interwoven branches. We're quite a pair, I said. A wishmaker who doesn't know where he came from, and a brand new genie who doesn't know what he's doing. We're alike, you and me, Ridge said. Neither of us has a lot of memories to draw from. Maybe that's why the universe put us together. Why? I asked. So we could help each other forget about the past, said Ridge, and move on to make our own future. I didn't reply, partly because I didn't want to believe that my chance to learn about my past was over. Save the world from zombie pets. Sure, that was a good thing. But the real reason I had gone with Ridge was to ask the question I had just asked. Now that I knew the consequence was too heavy to bear, I wondered what I had left. Just a folded ace of hearts in my right pocket. Chapter 17. Sleeping in the forest was not the way I liked to pass my nights. Sometimes before dawn, I woke up freezing cold. I said hello a bunch of times, using that consequence to grow out of my sleeves until they covered past my hands. I hoped my newly grown shirt would be enough to warm me, but my teeth were still chattering. So then I woke up Ridge impulsively wished for a blanket. As a result, whenever I brushed my teeth, the toothpaste would taste like cauliflower. The consequence would only last the week, and I didn't imagine I had a lot of time for teeth brushing before the quest ended anyway. I accepted the consequence, and I think, secretly, Ridge was grateful that the blanket was extra large so he could curl it around himself too. By the time I was finally warm and somewhat comfortable, the sun was up and it was time to get moving. I took a deep breath, stretched like a cat after napping, and stared off into the forest. 2 days of my quest to save the world had passed. 5 more to go. Did you make the wish yet? Tina asked, coming over to check on us as she breakfasted on one of the peanut butter sandwiches from Ridge's backpack. I knew she was talking about the second missing page from Thackeray's notebook. We were directionless without it, but I wasn't looking forward to discovering what kind of consequence I'd have to endure. I'm getting to it, I said, shrugging off my blanket and rolling up my extra long shirt sleeves. I just wanted to be prepared for whatever the universe was going to throw at me. I don't think any of us can ever truly be prepared, Tina said. It's painfully random. She adjusted her feather boa. It looked matted and gross after a night in the forest, but I still felt like I had things worse. I gave Tina a flat stare. You got a fashion accessory, I said. I forgot how to read. I waved her off. Besides, your genie can transform into a wolf, so I don't know what you're complaining about. Yeah, Ridge cut in. How does she do that? Tina shrugged like it was no big deal. It was a wish, she said. But you didn't say it, I pressed. I've seen Vale transform a couple times, and I've never actually heard you say the wish. She just does it when you say that weird word. It's called a pay-as-you-play wish, Vale said, joining us with a sandwich of her own. Ridge should tell you about those. I looked at Ridge. Judging by the look on his face, he was just hearing about pay-as-you-play wishes for the first time, too. It works like this, Vale said, when it was apparent that Ridge wasn't going to explain it. Sometimes you might want to wish for the same thing more than once. But when you're in the heat of the moment, you don't always have time to verbalize the wish and debate whether or not to accept a new consequence. Tina stepped in to clarify. So I made a single wish that allows Vale to transform between human and wolf anytime I say a certain word. Paradiddle, I specified. What does it mean? It's the name of a drummer's rhythm, answered Tina. I didn't know rhythms had names, I said. Tina nodded. I took a year of percussion lessons, but it wasn't for me. Now that I quit, I'm pretty sure that's not a word I'll be using in normal conversation. I needed something I wasn't going to say by accident. I get it, I said. If you had picked and as your trigger word, then Vale would have been transforming practically every time you spoke. Exactly, Tina said. And while it's good to have her in wolf form for protection, it has an ongoing consequence. This is why it's called pay as you play. What's your consequence? Ridge asked, but I had a feeling I already knew the answer. Every time Vale takes the wolf shape, I'm forced to hop around like a bunny. You should consider something like that, Vale said to me. Hopping around like a bunny? I asked. No thanks. I'd seen Tina do that a few times, and she looked ridiculous and rather helpless. A pay-as-you-play wish, Vale clarified. Pick an animal or some other form of protection that Ridge can become. Think of a trigger word, make the wish, and take the time you need to consider the consequence when it's not a crucial moment. I glanced at Ridge, trying to imagine him as a grizzly bear or a lion. It was a stretch of the imagination, watching the skinny kid pick absently at a scab on his elbow. I mused. I'll have to think about it. Not to pressure you, but the point is that you don't have to think about it, Tina said. When those rock creatures attacked, I didn't have to make a wish, debate the consequence, and decide whether or not to accept it. The decision was already made. All I had to do was say the trigger word, and Vale sprang into action. I liked the idea of a pay-as-you-play wish, but I didn't want to take another consequence right now, especially when I was about to wish for something that the universe considered highly important. While you're thinking about it, Tina said, why don't you ask your genie what was on the second page of that notebook? I couldn't tell if she was getting anxious to get on the road or if she was just gloating over the fact that she'd beaten me in rock, paper, scissors. Either way, I couldn't put it off any longer. I turned to Ridge. I wish I could know exactly what was written on the second page of that black notebook we found in the Anderson's trailer. You got it, Ridge said, seeming pleased to be the middleman between me and the universe. I had some sympathy for the new genie since our conversation the night before. Understanding that I was his first wishmaker made it clear why, frankly, he wasn't very good at genieing. "If you want to know what was on the second page," said Ridge, "then your left arm will go missing for a day." "Go missing?" I cried. "How does a person's arm go missing?" "It's going to fall off," said Ridge. "But it'll be completely painless." "Then how do I reattach it?" I asked, horrified by the thought of my arm dropping off. "Oh, you'll just grow a new one in 24 hours. "What if I don't like my new arm as much as I liked my old arm?" I asked. I couldn't believe that I was actually having this conversation. "It'll be identical," Ridge said. "You'll never know the difference." "I think you should do it," Tina contributed. Of course she did. It wasn't her arm that was about to fall off. I glanced at my hourglass watch, strapped around my right wrist. Luckily, that wouldn't fall off with my arm. "If you don't accept the consequence," Tina persisted, "then we're basically stuck out here." It was time to make a choice. "Fine," I said, shooting a piercing glance at Tina. "I'll do this, but you're taking the consequence for the third page." She stared blankly at me, and I knew my hourglass time was about to expire. "Bazang!" I said. There was a thud on the ground beside me. When I looked down, I saw that it was my arm. The whole thing had come detached at the shoulder and dropped right out of my extra long sleeve. I was mortified by the sight of it, and for a moment, I was seized with fear that the universe could have lied, and my left arm would never grow back. At the same moment, my mind was flooded with the knowledge of exactly what was written on the second torn out page of the notebook. All I had to do was open my mouth, and the universe practically spoke for me. The second task lies to the west in the state of California. You must enter an amusement park known as Super Fun Happy Place and eat the green cotton candy sold by a man with a pink mustache. I paused, staring into the anxious faces of 3 of my companions. "And?" "That's all of it," I answered. "We're just supposed to eat some green cotton candy at Super Fun Happy Place?" Ridge said. "That's weird." "Weirder than poking a stone statue of President Roosevelt in the eye?" I reminded him. Nothing about this week was shaping up to be very normal. And talk about weird, now I only had one arm. We stood in a small circle, silently pondering the absurdity of our task. I'd never been to Super Fun Happy Place, at least not in the 3 years I could remember. Kids were always raving about how fun the rides were, so maybe our trip wouldn't be too bad. Yeah, right. Chapter 18. We were becoming expert hitchhikers. Once we finally staggered out of the forest and found the road, it only took a half hour before Tina made a wish for a nice mom to pick us up and take us farther west. The consequence seemed small. For the rest of the week, any time Tina took a drink of water, it would be warm. Not scalding, just unpleasantly warm in this July heat. We must have seemed like an odd quartet of passengers to the mom driving us. Tina screamed when she sat down, and I found myself saluting every white vehicle we passed. Then there was my missing arm, freaky yellow eye, backward pants. I probably looked like a zombie. Gratefully, the universe shielded those unsightly consequences from suspicion, and the driver talked to us like we were on our way to soccer practice. Just to be clear, you should never hitchhike. It's a risky and rather dangerous mode of transportation, and the only reason I felt remotely safe doing it was because I was traveling with a genie who could grant my any wish. By early afternoon, we were on our own again. Tina hadn't been specific enough in her wish, and the driver suddenly seemed to realize that she had gone several hours past her exit. She dropped us in the middle of southwestern Wyoming, the middle of nowhere, so we decided to pause and have some lunch. With one arm missing, I couldn't open the zipped bag without Ridge's help. His supply of sandwiches was dwindling, and I knew the four of us wouldn't make it to the end of the week unless we found my backpack. The scenery here looked pretty bleak and barren, without even a spot of shade for us to eat our lunch. The landscape was so monotonous that I found myself getting excited to watch a freight train slowly approaching from behind us. A white car drove past, and I jumped up to give it a swift salute, slamming my half-eaten peanut butter sandwich into my forehead. As soon as lunch was over, Tina or I would have to make a wish to get us on the road again. But I was dreading another consequence. What if my other arm fell off and I had to spend the rest of the day running around like a pencil with legs? Hey! Tina stood up, her gaze directed over her shoulder to a car approaching from behind. Her comment got my hopes up at first, like maybe someone would pick us up without wishing for it. But I quickly realized that the vehicle speeding toward us had no intention of slowing down. The four of us were standing a safe distance off the highway, but the car was swerving like there was a first-time driver at the wheel. Then I recognized the car. Hey! It was my turn to shout. That's the Oldsmobile! That's Thackeray Anderson's car! I didn't know how we had possibly gotten ahead of Thackeray and his dad. But there was no mistaking the vehicle. As it drew closer, I could see the pirate man in the driver's seat. The Oldsmobile zoomed past us, and the driver turned his head, the look of surprise on his face matching my own. In the passenger seat, I saw the boy we were after. He ran a hand through his slick blonde hair, the collar of his black leather jacket turned up. I didn't spot his genie in the car, though if he was still a wishmaker, I knew she had to be within 42 feet of him. We have to stop them! I bellowed, breaking into a sprint, my single arm pumping for speed, but I knew my legs would never catch up to the speeding car. I opened my mouth to make a wish, but Tina beat me to it. I wish the Oldsmobile would run out of gas right now, Tina yelled to her genie. I stopped running, turning back to hear what the consequence would be. If you want the car to run out of gas, answered Vale, then every time you pass through a doorway for the next year, you have to say, alley-oop. Bazang, said Tina without even asking further questions. Tina glanced up at me, her face flushed from the intensity of decision-making. My attention turned up to the highway to the Anderson Oldsmobile. It didn't work, Ridge shouted as the vehicle continued to move away from us. I squinted. It's coasting, I said, but it's slowing down. I liked it better when the tire blew out, Ridge said. Last time, we didn't have so far to catch up. The four of us ran along the roadside, anxious to reach the villains and make our long-awaited capture. We were still 40 or 50 yards away when the Oldsmobile veered suddenly, using its momentum to propel itself off the road. It went crashing down a dusty embankment and continued rolling through the desert landscape until it finally came to a halt in a cloud of dust and engine smoke. I swerved down, making a straight run for the ruined car. The passenger door flew open, and the boy stepped out, his black leather jacket zipped up to his chin, despite the hot afternoon. The boy's father also emerged, and when he turned, I saw that he was wearing my backpack. The two of them left the car and took off running into the desert. Ridge and I sprinted off the road toward them, while behind us, Tina and Vale were running too. Basically, there was a lot of running. I didn't know if the villainous duo had a plan. There really wasn't anywhere for them to go except the train! I shouted, frantically waving my one arm as I realized their plan. Cutting across the vast landscape, the freight train had finally reached us. chugging on its westward track just 100 yards ahead. Thackeray and his dad reached the train, sprinting alongside it. I could tell they were trying to find a way to leap aboard, but the locomotive was simply moving too fast. The man shouted something to his son. In response, the boy reached into the pocket of his leather jacket and withdrew a glass pickle jar. He must have ordered his genie out because his words were followed by the sudden appearance of the Polynesian girl I'd seen atop Mount Rushmore. Seeing her wishmaker on the move, the genie girl broke into a sprint to keep up. Thackeray shouted something back to her, but I couldn't make it out. It must not have taken long for him to accept the universe's consequence, because the genie promptly disappeared, and the boy slipped the pickle jar back into his pocket. Instantly, the train began to slow. For a moment, I wondered if it might come to a halt, but that wouldn't make sense. Why would you make a wish that would stop your only means of escape? The wish must have slowed the train just enough for Thackeray and his dad to catch up. Now that it was moving at a more manageable rate, the man grasped a railing on the edge of the car and managed to hoist himself up. Bracing, he reached back and clasped hands with his son. The boy stumbled on his oversized smiley-face shoes, and I held my breath, but the man flung them both backward, pulling his son to safety on the train. "They're getting away!" Rich shouted, but I didn't feel like I needed to resort to wishing yet. This was a long train, and I was determined to climb aboard before it picked up full speed again. Leaping at the sagebrush, I saw the final train car speeding along. I planned my route, picking a diagonal path across the desert that would get me to the train before the last car passed. The huge metal wheels were thundering on the tracks, and I could barely hear Ridge calling, "We're not going to make it!" Tina caught up to us, and her lip balm jar was clutched in her hands. "Vale," she cried, "get into the jar!" In a cloud of smoke, the red-headed girl vanished, and Tina leaped onto the ladder at the very end of the train. "We're going to have to jump at the same time," I said to Ridge, noticing that the train was rapidly picking up speed again. Our window of opportunity was closing. Tina perched on the ladder of the last railway car, reached out her hand for me. Vale reappeared at her wishmaker's command. Now she was holding fast to the ladder beside Tina, leaning out and beckoning to Ridge. 1, 2, I counted, trying to prepare Ridge so we could leap together. 3. We jumped. My one and only other hand grasped Tina's. She jerked me up with as much force as she could muster. I slammed into the ladder, unable to grip with my only arm. I dangled there, wondering how Tina managed to hold on to me. My feet floundered underneath me for a moment. Then they found the first rung of the ladder, and I pushed up. Tina hauled me upward, and together we spilled onto the open top railway car in an uncomfortable mound of coal beneath us. Ridge was already there, grinning at me. Vale crouched behind him. Ridge's hands were shaking, and his face was smeared with soot from the coal. I sighed. The train was back up to full speed, the wheels thundering along the track. I tried to pull away from Tina, but she just lay there, holding tightly to my hand, fingers interlocked with mine. "You can let go of my hand now," I said. Tina sat up, staring at me. "No, I can't." Before I could wonder at this sudden show of affection, she explained, "It's a consequence, remember? Our hands are stuck together for the next 5 minutes." Well, this was going to be awkward. I only had one arm to start with, and now I was sitting in an open car of a freight train holding hands with Tina. "We need to find Thackeray," she said, ignoring our current situation. I didn't know what Tina planned to do with him, though. She didn't need to save Thackeray's life until he became an ex-wishmaker. Maybe she could help me capture him and wait until his genie time expired. "With any luck," said Vale, "Thackeray won't know we've gotten aboard. We might have the element of surprise. Let's go." "Actually, we'll probably need to wait about 5 minutes. Tina and I—" "Are you guys holding hands?" Vale asked. I felt my face going red. I can't let go of him, Tina said. How romantic, Ridge replied. It's not. I trailed off with an annoyed grunt. Thanks for embarrassing me, universe.